Okay, so here we are. Welcome to a few minutes unnecessarily delayed open hours talking about 3.5. Roadmap and timeline. We have some general topics to discuss. We don't really have a lot of specific things that we can go into too much detail unless you guys want to take the mic and start chatting us up. But kind of the theme of this open hours is that we're extending the opportunities to chat us up in other forums, so you don't have to wait to talk to us in open hours. But so let's just start off by stating the obvious that YUI Conf is over, and it was awesome, and we're pumping out the videos from those sessions pretty regularly. That's what Ryan's working on right now, and I believe Alan is helping with that. Eric, do you know?
Yeah, I think Alan and Reed and Ryan all like to do video editing, so they're all like collaborating together on creating the awesome videos that you guys should have seen some of them up already.
Yeah, and hopefully you've all seen the Matt's humorous video. So that might delay the recording of this getting up on the blog, but it'll get there eventually. So let's see. The high-level roadmap for 3.5 was laid out in this blog post from before the conference, and for the most part, it hasn't really changed much. I think that we get individual feedback. This is really high-level, and actually, to be honest, I wasn't even familiar with some of this stuff like carousel.
Can you make your text a little bigger, Luke?
Oh, yeah, sure. Whee! So the high-level goals for 3.5. So carousel. I'm not even sure who's working on carousel. So there was some news to me. I'm kind of buried in here right now, actually, but I imagine most of you are already familiar with that. But there's some stuff in 3.5 that's already there, and there were some easy wins that. And like test console, for example, was a modified console that I had built my tests on just because it was prettier to look at for doing testing. That's most of what I use console for. And
so we for all the unit tests for the unit test page that every component has.
Right. And then I think Ryan adopted that. And I don't know, did you also adopt that console? But
yeah, I mean, I just follow suit. That we would take like a standard HTML page, and then you write your test YUI module for your particular component, and just it automatically will load it up and look nice and run everything and filter out like passing tests, so there's not noise, just showing the tests that have failed.
Right. So it was. Yeah, so Ryan just bottled that up and made it a separate module that looks a little nicer, and that's good. It's actually what I think about Test Console is it also makes a really good avenue for folks that are coming to the library that are wanting to get involved in contributing code back in. This is a great widget to say, I can make this fancy and shiny and have things that are green and add icons and all sorts of things like that. And you could sex up Test Console a little bit and, issue pull requests or something like that. And you're not going to be impacting one of the production widgets or anything like that. So if you wanted to get your feet wet with doing pull requests against widgets, then Test Console would be a good one back in the core. But to me, I guess there are a few things that stand out about the 3.5 the 3.5 plan. One is that we're doing some refactoring of some important things, which in particular the get utility and loader are getting a lot of attention, and data tables getting a lot of attention at long last. And then the two other pieces that really stand out to me for 3.5, not to lessen the importance of the other things, but the two things that seem to be getting an awful lot of traction are the app framework. I'm sure most of you have seen Eric's excellent talk from YUI Conf on that and how it's getting built up like crazy and lots of great stuff in there. And then lots of new modules coming in, but the tree view and the data table and potentially the button widget all bring in this interesting challenge where we're dealing with lots of individual things. So this sort of parent-child relationship between data table and its rows, tree view and its nodes, or in the case of button, not necessarily a parent-child relationship as much as there could just be a ton of these buttons on a page, right? So it really pushes the issue of making sure that we have support for really fast rendering and instantiation, or dealing with the widget infrastructure in such a way that we get performance benefits. We're not getting hit by the performance of having to create a bunch of new instances, widget instances, attribute instances, and going through the initialization cost for that and the memory cost for that. So we have a lot of discussions going on that are mostly public at this point, actually, and that's kind of the point that I wanted to highlight in this open hours, are the different places that we're trying to expose those conversations. Instead of just doing like this week we're going to be talking about data table design, or this week we're going to be talking about the button and so on and so forth. That's a terrible amount of delay, and we have some engagement in the YUI channel, but that's sort of a more signal to noise ratio, and also the IRC channel serves as sort of a support channel as well, and so we don't want to mix that message. So what we've been doing is been trying to put our thoughts and our design plans and our discussions on GitHub and into individual gists. And actually, Ryan, I think, no, I'm sorry, Eric, you started this with this here. We've done individual gists and things, or at least text files or something like that do design plans, but I don't think we really started sharing it so actively until just now. But talk about what's going on here, Eric.
Yeah, so this was kind of inspired. There was a post that the GitHub folks did. An employee at GitHub wrote on his personal blog, I believe, about how they use pull requests internally at GitHub for new features. And these pull requests may be long-lived, so they may last for months, say. And what I wanted to do was do something similar here with the y.app module and class, and basically have a longer-lived discussion. And I knew I was going to be committing a lot of code and having questions about specific lines in the code or wanting to get feedback from people. And so what I did is I just created a branch on my personal fork of YUI, did work there, would push to GitHub when I had something cohesive or working or whatever. And then once I had a little bit of stuff going, I issued a pull request to the main YUI repo. And then from there, anytime I commit and push new changes to my app branch, which is what I am requesting being pulled in here, they just automatically get added to this pull request. So this kind of serves as a nice page that shows all the commits. I could probably add more to the description, and then all the various discussions that have happened, where either I put on a comment at the bottom of this page. So I have my audio turned up I'll just try talking louder. Hopefully that'll help. So you can comment at the very end, or what's even better is comments can be done on individual lines, which makes it really, really nice where, like what Luke's showing right there. We can just talk about a particular part of the code, and that way, like, this is all just bottled up nicely in one place. So it's kind of, once you're maybe past the design phase and you're starting to actually code something out, I found this pull request, this long-lived pull request, to work pretty well. And then once I have like my unit tests and the code documented and I'm satisfied with it, I can go ahead and then merge this in. Or if this was somebody who doesn't have the ability to merge things in, like an external contributor, this would still work great, is to service this like new feature that maybe somebody's wanting to add or work on, and they first add some code, they get some feedback, they add some tests to it, they get more feedback, and then when it's ready, then we can merge it in. So that's what I was experimenting with here and seeing how it works. So far, it's been pretty good. Probably the biggest thing that learning out of this is to not check in build files to this, because it just adds more noise. But that's probably the only. I mean, that's just a thing we want to hopefully get rid of anyways with our project, not having to check in build files. But
right, I guess that's kind of an unspoken one. We haven't really documented, but a goal is we would like to have the source control just manage the source files and not the build files, or so that we're not checking in the build files anyway.
Yeah.
But so at this point,
yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Also open for, since this is public, anyone to look at, review, comment on, add their thoughts, and I definitely encourage people to do that. So
yeah, and that's the thing, is that the GitHub comments are they work pretty well. The notifications work pretty well, and so we'll receive an email that somebody commented on one of our pull requests, or someone commented on one of our gists, and so it has the benefit of being public discussion. So these pull requests are open for anyone to comment on. We definitely recommend that you comment on them. But the support for pull requests coming in from a development branch, for example, we can do design work in a separate place, like in a gist, in one of the gists that we have going on for proposals. And then each of those supports individual comments and feedback. But then when we get into, like what Eric was saying, when we get into the implementation details, then you can start working on a development branch and pushing those development branches back up to our developer forks of the YUI 3 project. So the difference here from what we were doing before is, instead of doing development maybe in Sandbox, in the Sandbox directory, then we'll be developing on a branch off of master in source. So we have our development branch going on, but instead of pushing that into source, which potentially pollutes the tip of tree, we want the tip of tree. We want the master repository to always be runnable and to always be working. So if we have new development going on, and we have potentially breaking development going on, we want that happening in a development branch. But pushing those development branches up to GitHub is a good place you can comment on individual commits. If you're following a particular developer or something like that, you'll see that as Eric's commits come in, then we could potentially say, I want to comment on this line right here, and you can have the comment. So you have that going on right there. but you can have commit level comments, or once you get to a point, like Eric was saying, once development gets to a point where there is some basic functionality that's actually working, so potentially this could get pulled into master because it's not going to break head. But maybe there's some other work that we want to do with it, but more than that, we want to say we're ready to pull this in, but we want to take a moment for review, to do some code reviews and open discussion. So hopefully the design discussion has already taken place, and at this point we're in implementation discussion and going into individual code reviews, and the code comments, or the pull request comments, work really well for that. And then eventually this gets pulled into master. If everyone seems fine with the pull request, it gets pulled into master. So this is actually happening from the team developers, not just the community, but so we're all going through the pull request mechanism for new and substantial changes that need code review. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, yeah. So for people that currently might be relying on master to have the latest and greatest, even new developments, such as what's going on here with the app pull request stuff, you won't be able to get the app stuff by doing by pulling down master. You'll actually need to merge in or separately fork. I guess maybe you'd want to merge into your own branch. You would have an experimental branch off of your own fork of YUI 3, and then you would have to merge in Eric's individual commits, right? You can't. This is a pull request that is against.
You can merge in my app branch. That would work.
Right.
All the commits.
Right. So just merge in the app branch, and then. So that's an addition.
So one thing that's nice about it is that it people don't have to necessarily go hunting around for on individual forks to see what people are working on. It would be nice if they were, you just go to GitHub/YUI/YUI3, go to pull requests, and then see stuff that people are working on, or bigger changes that are looking for feedback. I guess the one problem here is to surface people who are contributing fixes, which are what most of the pull requests are, like bug fixes and stuff, versus these longer-lived pull requests that are for features. So, so it'd be interesting if we could figure out a good way to manage that. I'm not totally sure what it would be yet. It would be nice if like GitHub had some way to label pull requests to say, like these are new big features and these are fixes, so that people could sift through them, or tag certain ones saying that they need feedback. So it would be nice if there was that type of thing. Maybe we could figure something out that would help surface, or at least categorize the different types of pull requests. The fixes,
yeah, I suppose the brain dead patch or workaround would be to preface feature pull requests with the word new feature or something like that, or just feature or something like that, so that there would be some sort of naming convention to filter them out, but there still wouldn't be any sort of programmatic filtration in here.
Yeah,
which would be nice. Maybe we could ask the GitHub guys for something like that.
The wiki feature or something to link to them. So
yeah, that's true. Actually, we have a wiki and we're not really doing anything with it right now. So maybe we could take some of the individual gists that we have going on right now and the feature pull requests and itemize them out on the wiki. So Victor, if you wanted to have a local YUI 3 fork and you wanted to use our individual, the in development branches, or you would have to merge those in. So I'm not sure if you're asking about the specific steps to go about merging in those branches from other repos, or just the general guideline to how you would do that. But the idea is that the development branch for app, for example, you would need to set up a remote for my fork and a remote for Eric's fork, and then you would probably want to create a new development branch off of your master that would be a place for those in progress branches to get merged into, and then just merge into your branch from Eric's branch and from my branch. So that's where the merging comes in. You don't want to switch to his branch. You want to actually merge his branch into your own development branch. And you can merge in as many branches as you want into your local branch, and that should alleviate that.
He could just, check out, like add my remote and then check out my app branch, and that would also work to test it without polluting anything he may be working on his master branch.
Well, right. That's why he would want to merge it into a development branch off of his master branch if you wanted to merge it. But I think what he was saying was that if he works on your branch, if he just checks out your branch, then he doesn't have my code, for example, or he doesn't have the button code. He doesn't have the other development in progress development going on. So you would have to merge it somewhere, merge those remote branches somewhere. But anyway, so I guess I'm a little bit hesitant to use the wiki for I guess it's something to just start it out by listing out the ongoing discussions for 3.5. But it almost seems like if there's a wiki, then it should be a place for documentation to live. And, we have YUILibrary.com for the documentation and stuff. And we're not going to be migrating that over to GitHub, so far as I can tell. I mean, it's a lot better to host our own content since there's a ton of it. So, I'm open to suggestions for if we should use the wiki and what we should use the wiki for. But I'm definitely sensitive to the issue that here we have pull requests that are being issued against YUI 3 from internal developers or external developers, but you can, actually, I guess if you're following a repo, if you're following the YUI 3 repo, you should get notifications that there was a pull request issued against that, right? Even if you're not one of the developers on it?
You would have to be a developer to get an actual email. Otherwise, you may get it in like the activity feed, but those things are so noisy. It's kind of useful.
Yeah, I've definitely filtered down my activity feed, but yeah, there's RSS, so it's sort of an imperfect solution at this point. But it seems like the best place to get notified of pull request related stuff would be through the activity feed, which is RSS. But that also doesn't solve the gist exposing the gists for design discussions and things like that. So we'll try to do a better job than we have been doing about broadcasting these discussions over Twitter and IRC or things like that. But it does seem like there should be some place to locate all of the ongoing discussions right now, and GitHub doesn't have any sort of programmatic way to collect all of those things, and it doesn't really seem appropriate anyway, because there's no difference from one gist to another gist if one is a design document and the other one is some little patch or dialogue from an IRC conversation or something like that. So maybe we can we'll just
have to figure out how to make it organized and discoverable. And
Yeah, it's the discoverability that's kind of an issue. Because, I mean, this thing has been, the data table, just for example, has been there for a while, I guess since November 10th, but it wasn't until, let's see, when did it happen? Yeah, about 2 days ago. Bad on me, wow. 2 days ago that we mentioned it in the IRC channel and started to get some feedback from you guys, which is fantastic. I mean, this is exactly the sort of stuff that we want, and this is the feedback that helps us not put out versions of a component that don't jive well with reality. I mean, if you've been implementing this stuff ad hoc, then the sorts of learnings and experiences that you've had doing that work are what help inform us what sorts of use cases to prefer, or what sorts of use cases that we make sure that we support that we might otherwise just forget about. So having the discussions be public is fantastic. And so I think that at this point the large part is discoverability. And then there's, getting used to using Markdown. I don't know, I'm still getting used to it. It's all good, but
see, the problem is actually on GitHub. If you're anywhere on the actual GitHub.com site, where there's a form field to type in Markdown, if you hit the M key, as in Mary, or Markdown, it'll show you like an overlay of all the shortcuts and like a little cheat sheet for Markdown. But on just.github.com, it does not do that, which is unfortunate.
Oh, that sounds like a feature request. So yeah, I guess if I could go to, well, that would be on your, it would work on your, where did it go? Yeah. That doesn't,
Just go to A.
Yeah, this one here. Yeah, there you go. Look at that. Excellent. Didn't know about that. That's good to have.
Yeah.
Nice. That's a good takeaway. So the design discussions we have going on right now, which in my opinion is great that we open these up early on in the YUI 3.5.0 dev cycle for PR1, are those that were listed in the YUI blog post, which is data table, because data table is going through refactoring. That'll be leveraging more of the views and sorry. Oh yeah, gosh, man. Clearly, I'm out of practice here. Leveraging the app framework stuff more, in hopes that that'll add a level of flexibility to the rendering of data table and the representation of data table. So new features and things like that can get mixed in a fairly intuitive way and not as conflicting as they have been. There's, in the current implementation of data table, there's certainly some trouble between feature conflict and things like that. So anyway, this is just an early design document for the plan for data table. I need to fill it out some more, and I need to reply to some of these comments. And then there's Derek, who's also with us today. This is an interesting one. This has actually been kind of a thorn in our side. The discussion of buttons and how to create some class for buttons, how to represent buttons in YUI. And so I'm really interested in getting community feedback on this, just because it's such an interesting problem, because we potentially don't want a button class that is a subclass of widget, because if you have a ton of buttons on the page and you want each of them represented as an instance of button, then that's a terrible lot of memory to deal with, right? And as I was mentioning earlier on, we have the performance related to rendering, the performance related to memory consumption, things like that. But we want to be able to make sure that we have the ARIA roles in place and we can apply the consistent styling. And all of those things that you just sort of assume are related to widgets. You want to enable it, disable it, you want to change attributes for it, and it might have an API of its own that are somewhat specific to buttons. But button is a conceptual thing that exists already in HTML. So there is an object for this. There is a tag for buttons. Now we're actually extending that so that it could be a link, it could be an input type button, it could be a button tag itself, and those sorts of things. But the basic functionality of a button is fairly well documented, and we're not wrapping up a lot of other nodes like we do with most of our other widgets, right? So there's no calendar control in HTML by itself. There's no slider control in HTML by itself, assuming HTML5 range, input type range, weren't there, but having the ability to style it and things like that. But and so there might be lots of buttons. So we don't want the overhead of the widget infrastructure, but we want to have a consistent API for creating instances of classes, for example. Do we want to break with that in order to have this be more of a factory thing? There's other discussions like if you wind up with an interface that has a bunch of buttons on it, in all likelihood, you'll have buttons in groups. And so, maybe you could have a class that represents a group of buttons, but you aren't individually representing those buttons. Or maybe having an individual button class that does extend widget, but using more of a flyweight pattern, and having a button group be an array list implementation that uses a button widget flyweight to avoid creating tons and tons of instances of button. Although I'm not sure how well that would work, because you generally want to work with individual buttons, do different things with individual buttons, which flyweight doesn't work for. It's more of an iteration type of thing. But interesting problem. The button is an interesting problem. But data table and tree view have a similar problem, which is that there's potentially n nodes, and there's potentially n nodes, and we don't want to create a bunch of widgets for them, and we want to maintain some level of flexibility with how they are defined, how they are rendered, and so we're sort of we're conflicting with the benefits of the infrastructure that we've established for widgets in general, but at scale, at scale, they start to be more costly, and we want to see what we can do about that. So another idea on the table is Satyen's suggestion for a widget string renderer class extension, which you can read about in this gist. But this one is focused largely on Victor, I'll answer that in just a second. This one is focused largely on it's using tree view as sort of a basis for the rationale here, but generally using in order to speed up rendering, avoiding using node instances and instead just doing string concatenation. So string concatenation from templates, be they handlebar templates or just substitute templates, and concatenating those strings together for the render phase of something will make stuff go tremendously faster. There's still potentially the open issue of memory consumption from a lot of instances of tree nodes if we are creating instances for tree nodes. Otherwise, we have to find some other method to have a tree node represented as maybe a simpler form of data, and then have that be stored. And that's perhaps more of an architectural discussion. But this particular gist is a suggestion for a class extension. So you could do, where's an example of this here? So on Node.js, for example, where we don't want to be introducing JS DOM if we don't have to, and we're not going to be doing any event wiring, right? Unless it would be individual change events, internal change events, but not doing any DOM event wiring anyway. So we really just need to create the markup that we will eventually push down to the browser. So that changes the render lifecycle for a widget. And so the idea being that we could stick in this class extension for classes that were targeted for use on the server that just overrode those internal pieces of the render lifecycle so that it wasn't doing the excess work of doing the event bindings and things like that to the DOM, just avoiding that and doing string concatenation so we weren't having to require JS DOM be in the picture. And then we end up with questions with that regarding how do we differentiate the API? Is it appropriate to differentiate the API in a case where you're only pushing out HTML and not doing those DOM event bindings? You're not working with nodes. So some interesting discussions going on here as well, but they all sort of circle around this larger question of dealing with widgets that potentially have a lot of child instances, and so when they at scale, working on the performance aspect of that. We definitely welcome your feedback there. So Victor, you had asked a question about data table and how compatible I plan to make the new implementation of data table versus the current one. And the short answer is compatibility with the current version is not my high priority. My high priority is making sure that the infrastructure is built in such a way that it better supports features being added in, not conflicting with each other, and ideally I want to simplify the API as it stands right now. In order to work with a data table that has any type of complexity, we end up doing an awful lot of plugins, and so there will be plugins to plugins, and the process of building up a data table, in my opinion, currently is far too verbose and complex. It's not friendly, especially to new people that come to the library. A lot of people that come to YUI come looking for the data table, and so as a sort of a flagship product for the library, it needs to be as simple to get started with as possible. And I think right now that the API has a ways to go. And that's kind of my priority versus keeping backward compatibility. So formatters, for example, might be defined the same. They might not be. So I haven't gotten into the guts of that part of the code yet. So I'm not planning on wholesale ignoring the want to have backward compatibility. But unless I hear some outrage from the community, I'm not going to be too terribly swayed by it's currently done like this, and so I want to make sure that I can support it still being done like that, if that answers your question. So, Eric, you want to talk about this just?
Sure. So some of the things that came out of working on the Y.app, the Y.app class, which is a higher level component because it's actually composed of a router mixing in our base PJAX class, which adds like the enhanced navigation, so navigating to a new URL without doing a full page reload from the server. So it brings in that, and And then it also has this additional flag on Y.app for the support of server routing. So it's an attribute that you can specify whether or not the server for the app is fully capable of handling all requests to the app, or is the app just like client side only? In which case it would always use hash based URLs. And so starting to work on that stuff, it surfaced some issues around the current way we're handling URLs in both router and the initial implementation of what we were doing for PJAX. So this just was something that I had all these things bubbling around in my head, needed to think about them and come up with something cohesive to describe what was going on. So this worked really well to do that. So I created this just to describe the different behavior I was seeing and things that I thought that should change and options for how I thought they could change. And then Ryan, who is works on the app framework as well, went back and forth. We went back and forth trying to figure out the best way to implement these changes. And actually, they are now all currently up on GitHub, the actual code changes. So that's cool. But yeah, so this is basically trying to do something really smart with how URLs are handled within the app framework. And I feel pretty good with where things are at now with that. And being able to have like a discussion and try to think through the problems and then get feedback was really helpful in figuring out the best approach for what we should do here.
Yeah, I find that it's also very useful just to document the problem that's spinning around in my head because it helps organize it.
Yeah, definitely. Especially as the problem gets more complex and you have to remember that you already thought about something and made a decision on it and the reasons why you made those decisions and not forget them. Yeah.
I guess Reed's not here.
No, so he's working on starting to work on Yeti a lot now to get it ready for like the next set of features.
Hooray.
And he showed this to us internally and had a meeting on it. But I don't think the link was really publicized. But so I added it to the blog post so that people could look at this because this is one of the things for 3.5 is more testing and more automation of testing and integration with Node.js, and so Yeti fits into the picture there. And Reed documented really well kind of his thoughts on what he's doing with Yeti and where he's going with that. So if people are interested, they can look over this and ping him with questions or feedback. So I think this is just a wiki page, so I don't know if there's like comments and stuff for it.
Right. Yeah, this was a wiki, so it's design plan, which is another thing that I think is another reason why the wiki, having a design document on the wiki is in some ways not as good as having a design document in a gist because it has the comments in the gist, and so you can update the gist, and it can be more of a living document that actually maintains the history of that conversation, which I think that there's a terrible amount of value in that conversation because it documents the decisions as they're being made. But maybe actually having the current version of the design plan live here and then maybe a link to the living document or the full discussion in the gist somewhere else, or maybe that's just duplicating work. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know some questions have come up too about if like this design discussion stuff should happen in the forums, or is GitHub just the best place for it? And I'm not totally sure where it kind of came out where we just started building out these gists to do it. I know I personally like the markdown and the code formatting stuff that is done on the gist better than what our forums do. And I'm not sure if it invites, the people who are, say, in this open hours, who would be wanting to contribute to the next features of the library, contribute to the discussions, where if the forum ends up being more of support questions and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting to figure out how not to fracture all the discussions that are going on.
Yeah, that is definitely a bit of contention where we have the forums, we have IRC, and to a lesser extent we have Twitter, and now we're sort of introducing another place to go. But I agree with you that the options for formatting and the code highlighting and things like that are just easier to deal with on GitHub than they are in our forums, and so that maybe at some point when we get the bandwidth to fix our forums and make them nicer, then we will move back over to our forums because it will be so nice. But also having the ability to go through the history of the versions on Gist, you can keep looking at this version or that version, so you can see how it changed. Although it doesn't have a diff, all right? There isn't a diff feature for this, right? I don't think there's a way.
I don't know. I know. I mean, it is a Git repository, so you could effectively
That's true.
Use the Git command line to look at it or something, or some GUI Git.
It seems like a lot of work just to see the diff. It also seems like the sort of thing that the GitHub folks would be nice enough to provide a utility for. But so jumping back over to the roadmap, you can see that we have a few dialogues going on in gists and in the pull requests for app, for example. But charts, for example, doesn't have a gist going on right now. Carousel dialogue, and some of these other, and tree view specifically doesn't have one. This one, I think, actually, I'd like to encourage Alan to add his thoughts and design thoughts on what his plan for the uploader is, because we were having a discussion about that internally, and it was an interesting discussion, and I think that there's value in sharing those decisions. I don't remember if we actually came to a conclusion on that one, but that's good. Oh, another thing that we're doing in 3.5 is we're finally getting around to making sure that all of our widgets have the proper ARIA roles and states, and we're also doing some better protection for either documenting or actually changing the behavior, but I suspect mostly documenting in a clearer fashion what attributes are going to be sent to inner HTML versus sent into text. And so trying to make it a little more visible as to how you can interact with the widgets in a safe way from user input, right? So you take user data and then you stuff it into this attribute here, and then boom, you have an XSS on your site because you didn't realize that an attribute, for example, wasn't sanitized or escaped for HTML. You were just assuming that it was text. So that's something that we can do on our end, and that's an sort of an unspoken high priority for 3.5 is making sure that we CYA a little bit on that. But I want to get your feedback in terms of how you think these forums are working. If the gist and the pull requests, you think that those are good ideas in your opinion, or if you think that there's some better suggestions for how we might be able to stay more transparent and engage the conversations. Should we be preferring the YUI library forum over using gists or even pull requests? what's worked for you. If you have a remote team, or you're also working on something that's out in the open, if you're doing community engagement, what sorts of tools are you using for that? So we want to make sure that we continue to increase our transparency. I think we do a fairly good job of that, but we're somewhat disorganized in how we're exposing all of that right now. So we need your help. So then, as far as the roadmap is concerned, this is nice to see being publicized early now. I think this is the first release of YUI where we're openly broadcasting our timeline for having the individual preview releases and the GA. I think the scheduled PR1 code freeze is December 9th, which would put the release on the following Monday. I think the 9th is a Friday. So if I can do math, then that would be the 12th.
It's like the 12th, I believe. It's Monday.
Yeah. So it's definitely an improvement that we're actually forecasting the individual PR plan, and right now it's approximate dates. As we get better at this, the idea is that we'll be able to say the scheduled date for PR1 is December 12th, and the scheduled PR date for our release date for PR2 is I don't know what it is for January, late January. But hopefully this is I would argue that this is definitely an improvement over what it was before, where it was often taken by surprise. But is it enough to broadcast that on YUI blog? Is there maybe some better integration with the site, putting content on the site, or maybe in a wiki on the site or something like that you would want this sort of information? Give us your suggestions and your feedback. You can say it now in the chat if you want, or if you have a mic, then you're welcome to speak up if you want to talk. Yeah. Okay, well, judging by my broken clock, it looks like we have about 2 minutes left. I can't make up the 5 minutes I stole from you at the beginning, but because I have another meeting to get to. But I think at this point, as much as can be said about it has been said about it, and in knowing me, probably more so. But we're back on open hours. We're doing it regularly. We want to get your suggestions on what sorts of topics you want to talk about. If you want to go into individual deep dives about these, just if you think that having the conversation live in comments is not enough real-time feedback, if you want to schedule some sort of meeting about it, a live meeting in IRC, that's another suggestion. But definitely give us feedback about what we can do to make the conversation, help the conversation and be more transparent about what we're doing. And with that,
we like ad hoc Google Plus Hangouts, and so anyone who's around at the time and wants to join, we could look at maybe trying that out too.
Yeah, I think it caps at like 8 people, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so we could do ad hoc Connect sessions or ad hoc Google Plus sessions, but yeah, we're definitely open to that, and definitely sometimes talking is faster than writing, although not quite as organized. Okay, so we're gonna have to close it up because we got time. I have to get to another meeting, and thanks everyone for joining in, and we will see you in IRC and on Twitter and everywhere else. So keep your feedback coming, suggestions for open hours topics, and we will talk to you guys next week maybe if we have something interesting to talk about.